Hey everyone, and welcome to Two Steps Forward, where sustainability meets business reality. We're live at Solutions House at London Climate Action Week.
So I think those grand goal-setting days were brilliant at the time, and having the vision and being able to galvanise and enthusiasm and drive people behind an agenda. But now, I think business skills and acumen are absolutely critical.
I'm Joel McCower, the one with the funny American accent. And that was Unilever's Chief Sustainability Officer, Rebecca Marmot. More from Rebecca in a bit, but first, please join me in saying hello to my co-host and friend and the hometown favorite, Futera Chief Solutionist, I got that right, Solitaire Townsend.
Hi guys. Hi. Can we have a live audience for every single one of these? Because I'm really enjoying this. No one claps on like a normal day.
Well, we'll start piping that in when we record between London and San Francisco. We'll get a little canned laughter or something like that. This is a nice symmetry because you were just out in San Francisco in April for San Francisco Climate Week, and now I'm here for this. What's your take on, first of all, on that versus what we're going to be seeing here this week, or what we are seeing this week?
So that was a really important question, but the first thing I have to say was that it was really sunny in San Francisco and it's raining here in London. So that was my first observation, is that the home cities turned up in the way they were supposed to.
And we did not come here for the weather, just so you know, or the climate.
No one comes to London for the weather. It was my first San Francisco Climate Week this year, and it was brilliant, and I got to see so many people that I haven't met before. But one of the things which came up again and again and again is we're basically in tech's hometown. Yeah. When we're in San Francisco, about 50 to 75% of the people who came to the events that I was speaking at or I was chairing worked in part of tech or supporting tech or in bits of tech which I didn't even understand what the words meant. And whilst London also has a very deep and deeply experienced tech sector, that's not what I suspect we've got in the room here. I think we've probably got a much more diverse set of skills and industries between the two. So yeah, London Climate Week, and it's a really big climate week here, and we're here in Unilever House in the centre of London. London Climate Week feels like tech is here, but it's not all dominating.
Yeah, well, that was only the second San Francisco Climate Week, so it's just ramping up and it's turning into a thing. But you're absolutely right. At San Francisco Climate Week, there's not a question you can ask, a problem that you can solve, or a solution that you can offer that isn't AI.
Yeah.
And it makes a sense to a certain extent that artificial intelligence is really a core solution for everything we're talking about here this week. It's not the solution, but it's a solution. If you think about what AI does, it takes massive amounts of information on complex problems and optimizes it, predicts it, offers suggestions or ideas or solutions. And if you look at what we're talking about here, climate, obviously, the grid, water, material flows, the way cities operate, ecosystem services, these are among the most complex things we know about right now. The biggest machine humans have ever created is the electricity grid.
Yeah.
And how do we optimize that in a world where everything's going electric? So AI plays a key role. Now, there are significant challenges, and we know about those, and we ignore those at our peril. So I'm not like all in on this is going to save everything, but it's going to be an important tool. So in San Francisco, that's how people roll. That's what we think about. And so I'm wondering if in your travels, and you work at a sort of a different side of a lot of consumer-facing brands, what are you hearing about AI and its role and as a solution?
So one of the things which I thought was quite funny in San Francisco Climate Week is people were literally counting the minutes until someone said the word AI. Like they'd literally whoop if someone said, and it's 5 minutes before someone mentioned AI, or it's 10 minutes before someone mentioned AI. And I thought they were doing that in a kind of semi-critical way that Brits would do, of sort of going, oh, it's 10 minutes that someone mentioned AI. But actually they were criticising that people hadn't mentioned AI earlier. Now, I'm as people know, I'm a solutionist, I'm an optimist. I started really getting my head around AI. Several years ago, about 6 years ago, working with Google on circularity. And of course we worked on circularity in their offices, and we worked on circularity of the products that they made. But one of the big things, which was a mind-popping moment when Kate Brandt, the CSO, and I were working together, was this insight that waste is a data problem. You have literal hundreds of billions of data points of bits of waste and things which have been used and things which could be reused, and actually human beings trying to work out how to use all of that in the most efficient way is just unimaginable, whereas that's something that AI can do. One of the things which AI is excellent at is dealing with massive amounts of really boring data that never stops coming. And for so many of the efficiencies that we need in sustainability, what we need is massive amounts of boring data that never stops coming to be properly managed, so that you can actually track when an empty vehicle, when an empty lorry or truck is coming in one direction, you can make sure that it's filled with something that somebody else needs. Where if somebody needs a certain post-consumer recycled waste, plastic, and someone else has got that, you can connect them up. One man's waste is another man's treasure, etc. So that side of AI I find really exciting. I find some of the large language models and some of the parts of AI which are about replacing human creativity, as someone who's a novelist, those ones I'm a little bit more torn about. So I think AI is very much what we make of it. And I've been in sustainability for long enough to know that sometimes the sustainability community spends a lot of time criticising new technology before we decide to grab it, harness it, and work out what we're going to do with it. And I'd really prefer if this time round we did criticise it and also worked out how we were going to use it at the same time, rather than sometimes coming a bit late to the party.
No, I think that's sage advice. Just one example that I was reading about yesterday, I just got a pitch letter from an entrepreneur that's working with Unilever. And just so everyone not in this room understands that Solutions House is in Unilever House.
It's being hosted in Unilever.
Here, a house in a house. It's
very homey.
It's very homey, exactly. This is just like my living room right here. Where a company that's using AI to read packaging on waste streams, of plastic waste streams at, I'm not sure if they're called that here, but we call them MRFs, materials recycling facilities, where you're recycling after it goes into the trash bin, comes out at the other end to be sorted and hopefully reused. To be able to look at a product by product, brand by brand, material by material, and see in real time where now it's humans who are sorting and moving things into different bins, but also to track so that a brand like Unilever knows where its products are ending up and how many of them are getting recycled, and maybe that leads to some more communications with retailers or consumers about how to make sure that they get but being able to do what you're doing, talk about waste streams of data that never stop. Packaging, and so that's a small thing, but that's indicative of where AI is going. So I think being in sustainability is an inherently optimistic profession. We wake up every day thinking about solutions and moonshots, or maybe they're now earth shots, that we need big, hairy, audacious problems we have to solve, and they're solved by small little things like looking at the packaging waste and counting things. And so that's where I think we're both glass half full. Although
two steps forward,
the name of this podcast. Although people say the glass is always full, it's half with water and half with air. Okay,
realism.
These are the total nerds. But I'm pretty optimistic about what AI can do. And yes, we have to solve a lot of problems. There's the energy use and the e-waste and cybercrime and all kinds of things, but I like to think that this is going to accelerate everything that we're here in London talking about this week.
Although one of the things to remember is that AI will only do what we ask it to. It will only look at these topics. It will only create these systems. We'll only be able to implement AI if we decide to. It's not magically going to invent solutions to the crises that we face without there being a big group of human beings who know a great deal about the topic, programming, algorithming, and asking the right questions of AI. And that's one of the things which I think is the reason why our community should really take a closer look at some of these technologies, because one of the things which I did realise being in San Francisco is there's a lot of people who work in tech, and they aren't always the most sustainability informed. And they're not always the most expert on the science and the issues and the needs right now. And so maybe they're asking the right questions, but maybe they're not. And so that the first action, the first thing that happens ever on an AI initiative is a human being decides to start it. Yeah. Or a human being asks a question. And that's one of the key steps in AI that I think we forget, as sort of almost the sci-fi idea of AI making its own decisions take up, of going, no, someone's got to ask it to do something.
Exactly. I mean, and I spoke at an event at San Francisco Climate Week that was bringing together the climate community and the AI community, and I was the opening speaker, and I said, basically, these are two different worlds that don't really understand one another, and they're quite different. You know, one of them is sort of dark and dismal and cataclysmic or existential or apocalyptic or however you want to think about it, and we don't really know where it's going to go and what the tipping points are and at what point this is going to take off without us. And the other is climate change.
So that took me a second.
Yeah, half a second for you. Anyway, it's an interesting topic, and to your point, Soli, I think the sustainability community, we need to at least understand it. If you're not writing algorithms, at least understanding it and asking good questions, because that's really what it comes down to. All this information is out there. What are you going to ask it, and how are you going to ask it questions that will get to big solutions, further, faster than we're doing this on our own? And if we can do that, I think we have some excitement, and we'll come back to, hopefully you'll come back to the San Francisco Climate Week next year and see that we've kind of solved everything.
It's a bit overwhelming though, isn't it? Like, as someone who works in sustainability right now, the list of stuff I've got to learn. I've got to learn AI and how to use it and how to deploy it and what the impacts of it are and how to integrate it into sustainability. I've got to keep track of global political changes and regulation changes and everything that's happening there. I've got to try to keep my eye on the science and what's actually happening in the science. I've got to watch the community. I've got to keep an eye on the innovation. Like, AI just sometimes feels like one more thing that's on the to-do list, and the idea that as sustainability people we can be expert across all of this can sometimes be a bit overwhelming, but we have to be, because someone else can be a micro-expert on one part of it and actually have a very successful career. In sustainability, we have to be able to do a bit of everything, because often in an organisation, we're the only person who knows the part of the pie that's ours, the social and environmental issues, and maybe we'll have a team if we're lucky that works around us. But we have to go out and learn everybody else's parts. And so whilst I really think that as a community we absolutely need to get more into this, I just want to acknowledge the fact of it is really freaking hard being a sustainability person right now, and AI might be just one more on that list of things. We go, really? Like, can I retire? Because then maybe I don't have to learn this. It's like, or if I'm a bit early in my career, I'm really going to have to learn this because everyone's going to expect me how to do it. So I think one of the reasons why we wanted to bring our community together today, and the wonderful audience, give me a hello, audience, is one of the big benefits of these climate weeks, of San Francisco Climate Week, of New York Climate Week, of London Climate Week. I've been in Paris. I think that Dakar is talking about doing one. I know Mexico City is discussing one, is to bring together these groups of people. You, those of you who are in the audience, those of you who are listening to this podcast later on, and actually connect us together. Because, otherwise it could have been an email. Whereas this human interaction, this ability to gather as a community, I think AI is super exciting, but I think we understand AI a lot more than we understand human beings and the magic that happens when human beings gather.
Well, that could not be a better segue, so let's bring out our guest today.
Well, it is my great pleasure sitting here in Unilever House, which is supporting and hosting Solutions House here in London, to invite Rebecca Marmot, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer here at Unilever and our host. Rebecca, thank you so much for letting us camp in your beautiful offices.
Well, thank you for inviting me this morning.
Your team have been so wonderful and so generous in helping make this happen and making Solution House actually the place to be for climate. We've got whole programming throughout the rest of today, and so we're starting this off. Rebecca, just to start with, you've had an incredibly long career here at Unilever.
Does that mean I'm old?
Darling, you do not even get to say that, Sri. This year is year 30, and we're just not going to mention John.
Yeah, people are saying, well, how cute that Solitaire brought her father today.
I don't even know what to do with that. But you've been working here at Unilever, and before that you worked in other FMCG and in government, and so you've seen a lot of these waves of new technology, of ups and downs in the sustainability community, of what's been happening in the outside world and the inside. How are you feeling right now? This week, Climate Week here in London, a moment in time. Are you 2 steps forward or 2 steps backwards in terms of how you're feeling in the moment?
So I, like you, like both of you, I'm an optimist. So I'd always be 2 steps forward and looking at the future with hope and hopefully lots of new exciting things on the horizon. It is a bit of a change at the moment for sustainability. There is a lot going on in the world, but then to a certain extent you think, well, when hasn't there been lots going on in the world? And it's very easy to get slightly pulled back with this, do people still care about sustainability? And there seems to be a dialing back. But I don't think that at all. I think it's an evolution, which is a good thing, because actually if you don't change, you don't progress forward. So, for me, that's something that's very positive. I mean, I sort of look back to when I first started working in sustainability, but it wasn't even called sustainability then. I was in a previous role at a different company, and we started to think a little bit more about provenance and I guess now what we would call sustainable sourcing, and the realisation that people, consumers, communities around the world were really interested to know a bit more about, where do products come from that I use and who's been involved in the making of that product. And actually, I'm kind of keen and want to know that that's been done in the right way. I think that was really sort of the very beginning. And then I was very lucky to come into Unilever at the same time as Paul Polman, who was such a visionary in that space, really looking at how do you run a business differently? How do you look at all the people across the value chain and the impact on the environment and turn that into something positive, and that move away from a linear process and into circular economy. And there's been lots of change, and sort of look back, and I think it's easy to be nostalgic around 10 years ago, 2015, and the Paris Agreement and the SDGs, and it was a super exciting time to be involved in sustainability, and there was this sort of sense of lots of energy and positivity about these new multilateral approaches, and they were brilliant. And I think if that hadn't have happened when it happened, we wouldn't, as a global community in the world, have made the kind of advances that have happened under the SDGs. And there is lots and lots of positive news and data to back all of that up. So I think it's only natural, actually, that at some point, you couldn't continue that exciting roller coaster. Everything's fantastic, everything's brilliant, because you need some pragmatism and you need some reality to say, we've got all these long-term goals and ambitions, and that's great, and it sets a North Star and it sets a vision around how people want things to be done differently, but we need to also deliver change and we need to see progress. Certainly at Unilever last year, we refocused our sustainability agenda, and the reason we did that was we needed to make sure that we could have an impact in the areas of A, material importance to the business, but B, where actually we had the skill set and we had the technical expertise and we had the connections to be able to bring positive impact. So really focusing, which for us is climate, nature, plastics and livelihoods, which are huge topics in themselves and a massive amount of work to do. And I think the other thing as well is this sense of urgency is a good thing, because you can have a net zero goal, and we have one here for 2039, and lots of other companies do, and again, that's absolutely brilliant. You see government setting net zero targets, but if you don't think about the short term and what you need to do in the next 6 months, in the next 12 months, in the next couple of years, you're not actually going to get to those long-term goals. And that element around pragmatism and being in the private sector, being able to reassure your investors that you've thought about the risks, that you've actually built those into your business planning, that you've integrated all of the sustainability work into your financial planning cycle, it's a really good thing. And I think, as a community, I feel we've matured as well. I remember a few years ago, we were talking about non-financial reporting and the importance of making sure that there was much greater transparency. And now, be careful what you wish for. We're deep in the weeds of looking at what that means for ESRS and CSRD, but that's brilliant because actually that attention to detail and working with other colleagues around the business and enabling that greater transparency, I think is a good thing. So, I think that will continue. So, I'm feeling good about it.
So you mentioned early on in that answer that when Paul Pullman came on, you're looking at how do you run a business differently. So just as the kids in San Francisco say, double click on that one a little bit. What have you learned about that? Because we all talk about changing the system. System change, we need, and change obviously is important and is happening all the time, but the kind of change that we're talking about that's necessary to meet the moment at the scale, scope, and speed that's required is not easy at all. It's really, really, really hard. And so what can you tell us about what you've learned and what you've learned, not just about what changing the company means, but what it takes to make that happen?
So you're right, it is really difficult. I can draw on the experience we've had here, but there's so many amazing people in the audience from different sectors, different parts of the economy, but just sort of thinking about the journey we've been on here. So we launched a sustainable living plan, as we called it, back in 2010, and it was probably one of the first, big businesses. We were one of the first big businesses to set out those very bold ambitions, but many others, and I can see friends in the room here from others in the private sector here, from companies who did similar things. It was really about setting that long-term vision, doing things differently, setting goals and targets. And I know now there's a lot of talk around, what do these targets mean? How are they really granular enough? But I think at the time that felt right because it was about a vision and it was about doing things differently. And of course, when you start, to a certain extent, it's a little bit easier because you get the low-hanging fruit. So you make progress quite quickly, and there's lots of excitement and energy around doing that.
And the wind is at your back. People saying, "Right on, let's do this. I'm excited. Thank you." And then what happens?
Exactly. And I think when I look back to the run up to 2015. Paul was asked by Ban Ki-moon, who was Secretary General at the time, to work with other businesses to really galvanise the support for business, government, civil society, NGOs, to all get behind the Sustainable Development Goals because there was a sense that you would make greater progress. So it was very exciting, it was very dynamic, there was the Paris Agreement, and I think there was this collective sense of optimism around doing things differently. I think what we then realised at Unilever was that's great, and we made a ton of progress in those early years. Alan Jope came on board as CEO, and incredible eye for brands and really understanding how do you then integrate sustainability into the business. So getting really much more into the weeds of this is what it means from a supply chain perspective. Actually, how do you set up sustainable sourcing and supply chains across crops and commodities? It's difficult to do that. We need to work with our suppliers much more closely. We need to think about the smallholder farmers. How are you helping them to improve their livelihoods, improve their yields, grow their own businesses? How do you bring in R&D? And I'm sure we'll talk a lot about innovation later because, again, I think that's a super exciting and positive part of what we need to do. But bringing that to life through the brands, as a consumer-facing company, one of the things that we can do is use the power and reach of our brands around lots of messaging on sustainability, providing communities around the world with the products and the services that they need. And then I think last year, I talked about this a bit at the beginning, Heinz Schumacher joined Unilever, and we took on a very pragmatic approach, and under his leadership really looked at what do we need to do to deliver our goals and targets. We short-termed a lot more. We did a second climate transition action plan to really understand where do emissions sit across our value chain. So super granular, what do we need to do to change out, for example, non-fossil fuel-based chemical feedstocks across our home care business? What do we need to do to really shift to regenerative agriculture? And the second part of what we did with the sustainability strategy was say, well, what kind of advocacy and policy programs do we need to have in place, and who are we going to work with if we want to shift from traditional agricultural systems, very highly dependent on chemicals and fertilizers, into regenerative agriculture that actually helps the farmers to improve their yields, protects the future generations of farmers. How do we have better quality crops and really de-risk the supply chain in terms of our agricultural commodities? So I think a really long-term shift away from just thinking about the future, keeping that still in mind, but also the short term and the near term, because it's super important for us. And as well, as I mentioned, talking about investors, making sure that you've got investor security and you've got that resilience and risk really baked into your financial planning processes.
So this whole story almost like tracks so much of my life in sustainability, because I actually was one of the externals who was here in Unilever House. They locked us in for 5 days in 2009 to help come up with the Sustainable Living Plan. And it was very visionary, and as were so many of the other plans at the time. And the reason why they were visionary is that we didn't have anything else. It's like we didn't have the detailed experience that we do now. We didn't have all of the data. We didn't have these global perspectives. We didn't have these systems in place. All we could do was look at the problem and come up with these visions of what were necessary, sort of with the gut feeling of going, we're probably going to have to be the people who implement it as well, but that's for future Soli to have to deal with, whilst current Soli deals with the big visions. And I feel that my skill set since those kind of 2010, 2015, the big commitments for many different companies, I feel that my skill sets have had to develop from being really connected to what the hugest idea is of what the future, through to how do you make stuff actually happen on the ground, and not just develop those skills, but develop a joy in making that happen as well, and getting down into the granular level. And in my book, The Solutionists, I talk about 2 different types of people in sustainability: the architects who have these big visions of the future, and the actioners who actually do things. And I feel that my skill sets have had to move a little bit towards the actioner, and that perhaps we're now in the, if that was the sort of vision, we're now in the do, and I'm sure we'll go back to vision as well, that these things go. I'd love to talk about the skill sets of a CSO in terms of being able to keep your eye on that big goal and think about and so what do we do next, and how do we make this happen in the next 6 months, not just the next 6 years. Over your time at Unilever, how do you feel that your skill sets have grown? And what are the skill sets that you're working on now? So, because we're all facing a new moment.
So you're absolutely right. I was listening to you before in your introduction. You're so right. There's been a massive transformation, I think, in the role of sustainability in wider society, but also people that work in sustainability, as we all do. So I think those grand goal setting days were brilliant at the time, and having the vision and being able to galvanise and enthusiasm and drive people behind an agenda. But now I think business skills and acumen are absolutely critical. If you don't, and I can talk about that from a commercial sense and being part of a business. If I don't understand and my counterparts don't understand what we need to do as a business, we won't be able to truly embed sustainability. So you need to understand the financial planning process. You need to understand how does R&D and innovation work. You need to really understand and work super closely with procurement and with supply chain, because if you think about consumer goods companies, so much of our scope 3, the vast majority, of course, is outside of our direct control, so we need to work with our big suppliers. You need to think at the other end of the value chain of working with what we call our customer development team, so working with retailers. That's often the front interface for consumers when you're talking about messaging and encouraging people on that sustainability journey. Finance, we've talked about in terms of reporting and the move to non-financial reporting. So many different aspects of the business and the business world are now part of sustainability. And then I think a big job for all of us as well is on this advocacy and policy shaping. And we see a lot of governments now perhaps sort of pausing on their net zero targets, being able to try and get that balance right between progressing to a green economy, how that's going to help growth, how that's going to help new jobs, new skills. You talked about AI, Soli. I find it mind-boggling, the opportunities, but also as well getting my head around what that means, and how do I ensure that we work in the right way to make systems more efficient when we're trying to embed sustainability. And I think if you can't work on the business case whether you're working in the private sector or whether you're a government, thinking about how you're going to sell in this new concept to your people, you're not going to get the job done. And I think, again, listening to you and Joel talking, I am an optimist too. And you think, well, surely people would see, this is the right way. But there's a lot of pressures in the world right now. We know when we do a lot of consumer research, of course, at Unilever, people can't afford to pay more for a product that's sustainable. They expect that to be baked into the overall offering. And I think that's right. Yeah. People want to buy a product that's made of recycled plastic, and they want to be able to recycle it after use. They want to know about the provenance. They care about the people who've been involved in the value chain, but they won't pay more for that. So you've got to think, actually, how can we talked a bit about innovation, how can I put an innovation lens across sustainability, or a sustainability lens across the R&D process? And the teams here at Unilever spend a lot of time and energy coming up with the best products and the best services to really delight our consumers. How can every single part of that brand process really delight consumers? The best packaging, the best fragrance, the best sensorials. And when you put a sustainability lens on that, you come up with new ideas and opportunities. So you talked a bit about the fossil fuel chemical feedstocks, not a sexy topic when you're trying to talk to consumers, but actually what does that mean? Well, if you start to look at the opportunities in biotech, in consumer goods, it's super, super exciting. And as we start to make those kind of investments, we come up with better quality products. We've seen the EU detergents regulation starting now to look at and potentially bring into regulation this move into biotech and away from purely dependence on chemical fossil fuel feedstocks. It's really exciting when we think about that. When you think about how can we massively concentrate products so that they're much more, the packaging is much smaller, that they're more concentrated, we're saving on packaging, we're saving money, but the consumer experience is much better. And when you put all of that together, it's really exciting.
Yeah. I was just going to follow up just to say there's two innovations that Unilever has pioneered that I feel have changed my sustainability impact. One is dry shampoo, because bluntly, I now wash my hair every 3 days. It's like the heat and the water from something like dry shampoo. And I'm not doing it for sustainability. I'm doing it because I only have to wash my hair every 3 days. And secondly is Wonder Wash, this new product that you have that means you can do 15-minute wash cycles, because Unilever had this breakthrough thought of going, our clothes aren't that dirty. Very few of us work in manual labour anymore. Very few of us actually have dirty clothes. And so a 15-minute wash cycle with the right product is enough. And both of those products actually have huge Scope 3 impacts on how consumers live their life, and particularly water and heat. But they're just brilliant products. So I think that's one of the things that Unilever has done really well, is to actually just make products that are better and are sustainable, sort of built in, but not rammed down the consumer's throat.
No, I think you're absolutely right. It's got to be something which enhances a consumer's experience. And outside of my sector as well, I think that's exactly the same. If there is a perception that the goods or the services that you're using are somehow a trade-off with sustainability, I think that's a very dangerous route to go down, and you end up with this ridiculous binary thought in your mind of, well, I can choose a sustainable product which is probably better for the earth and it's better for the people, but it's just not as effective, and that won't work. Yeah. That's not going to work in the long term.
Crap. Just to be clear, I did wash my hair today, just for everybody in the room.
TMI. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about that piece, because I think where this breaks down for a lot of consumer product companies is at the consumer level. I mean, I've been in this. I got into this field full time 37 years ago. Okay, you win. You weren't born yet, Soli.
That's very kind of you to say.
And at the time, the surveys were saying that 86% of consumers would gladly buy the greener product, and 68% of those would pay a little bit more for the privilege of doing that. And of course, as we all know, at least outside of this room and maybe the podcast listeners, people haven't really changed their habits all that much. They talk a good game. I wrote a piece like, who's the biggest greenwasher of them all in terms of who in the value chain says they'll do one thing and don't do it. They don't live up to their expectations. They're not improving year over year. It's consumers. So What have you learned about talking to consumers in a way that galvanizes them? I mean, we talked a little bit about that sustainability has to equal better. You don't have to wash your hair as much, whatever the value proposition is. But what have you learned about really engaging consumers, getting them on board, having them say, yes, we're in this together. Me and Unilever, or this product that I'm, Dove soap, we're doing this together because this is how we make a better world. What have you found that works?
I think, in the spirit of this podcast as well, most people want to do the right thing, and most people want to make choices that they feel are good for the planet and that are good for the people who've been involved in bringing that product to them. But also, as we've all just been saying, not to sacrifice on efficacy and not to sacrifice on what the product's going to deliver for them. So we've spent a lot of time and effort talking to consumers, listening to what people want, to try to understand how we do that. And I think it's a journey, as they say. We're doing a lot of work, for example, at the moment on refill and reuse and plastics, because we know and we hear all the time around the world, regardless of the country where we're talking to people want to eliminate plastic waste. It's a really important point, and no one wants that. They want to keep plastic, in the circular economy, and part of that is refill and reuse. But it's hard. You go into a store, it's a bit messy. Which container do I use? Is it clean? Oh no, someone spilled something on the floor. Now I actually can't go to that bit because it needs to be mopped up and I can't go and stand there. And what does it really mean? So on those kind of things, you've actually got to work pre-competitively with others. We're doing a big project at the moment with a number of other consumer goods companies and retailers to look at how do we do that. We've taken a city and we've all agreed together pre-competitively that we will look at how do you have one refill reuse method and approach that we can trial and install across the city, so we can really try to see what that looks like at scale, because it's got to be frictionless, it's got to be easy for consumers to do that. So I think really listening to what consumers want and then trying to deliver on that is super important.
So are you working with some of your competitors, Procter & Gamble, Clorox, or any of the others, to create those refill systems that are standardized across brands?
100%. So actually the example I was talking about before, L'Oreal, we've been talking to around how do we do that with some, for example, of our personal care portfolio and other manufacturers and retailers coming on board as well, because you need to try and galvanise that move across society so that actually making the sustainable choice becomes the obvious and easy choice, and it becomes standard practice.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the work that we're doing, for example, on things like regenerative agriculture, is trying to really understand and get the messaging right. So if you talk about regenerative agriculture, people look at you and say, I think it sounds good. Is that the same as organic, or does that mean sustainably sourced? I don't totally understand exactly what that means. And actually, if you talk about, well, what we're trying to do is make farming better for the farmer, so that the farmer is going to get better yields, they're going to have better quality soil, there's going to be emission reductions when it comes to looking at methane or carbon. What we're going to be able to do is future-proof our supply chain, so we'll be able to help make a positive contribution towards food security. That's going to make good, nutritious, healthy food available to consumers, crucially at an affordable price. Because again, there isn't going to be a trade-off. People can't afford to pay more for the sustainable choice. So all of that needs to be built in. But I think a lot of it is around the messaging.
Let me just dig into that idea of collaboration for a second, because collaboration, we talk a lot about collaboration in sustainability. We talk about the fact that we need to collaborate more, and it's only through pre-competitive and collaboration we'll get there. Collaboration is hard. Like, one of the things which I don't think we acknowledge enough is how really, really difficult it is to get a group of people in one business culture to collaborate with a group of people in another business culture. It's difficult for individuals to collaborate. It's difficult for organizations to collaborate. And I think sometimes we don't acknowledge how much freaking work it just takes to try to negotiate some of this. And then the lawyers get involved, and then marketing doesn't want to have the same brands next to each other, and blah, blah, blah. So you've been involved, and Unilever's been involved in so many of these collaborations. And I'm sure many of them have been very successful. I'm sure some of them have been really difficult. Again, in terms of the skills of somebody who works in sustainability, what are the key things that as sustainability people we need to learn about collaborations? Do we need to eat our ego a little bit more when we go into them? Do we need to get to know individuals? Do we need to make sure that we're bringing everybody else in our own organisations with us? How do you make a good collaboration work?
Yes, I think it's very easy to say, we all need to, we know we all need to work together. And, and everyone says it's kind of an obvious thing. So actually, to your point, Soli, so what does that mean in practice? Like, how do you actually really make that happen? And I think part of it is, heightened, enlightened self-interest. That's okay. You need to understand, we were talking about plastics or regen agdis a couple of minutes ago. What's the role of each person along the value chain, and how are you going to improve their situation by them being part of it? So we did a big exercise, as you would expect, when we were going through the Climate Transition Action Plan and the SBTi validation process to really understand where our emissions sit. So one of the things that we need to do is work really closely with our 300 biggest suppliers. And I think it's about identifying where can I have the biggest impact at scale rather than hundreds and hundreds of small pilots, because although they're well-intended and well-meaning, it doesn't really add up to having impact. So then sit down with those 300 suppliers and say, right, this is where we need to work in this market on these crops, so that it's actually super granular and it's very pragmatic, and we understand what the KPIs are, and you approach this in the same way as you would any other financial partnership. And I think if you do that with each of the different players, you're going to get a much more realistic outcome. So I think part of it, coming at it from two perspectives, part of it is be very financially focused, be commercially oriented, have the KPIs in place, and make sure that you have the same level of professionalism that you would have in any other part. And then on the other side, bringing the friendship, the emotion, the personal understanding. At the end of the day, success is based on relationships, isn't it? Whether you're talking about your personal life, your work life, or getting things done. And I think when you start to really try and understand the other person's perspective, and you're looking at how can you win together, that's going to be much more successful.
Well, we're running up against this thing called time and the clock. But before we let you go, Rebecca, I want to ask you a question that when we come back together at London Climate Action Week 2027, in 2 years, at Solutions House and have another conversation, what's the story you hope to be able to tell about Unilever and sustainability?
Well, hopefully we've made progress on our targets. But I really think there's a shift into being even more pragmatic. So I'm never going to give up on multilateralism and all of the great things that we've talked about on this podcast. But I think actually getting very granular in country and making sure that we've got really defined national programs in place, that we have worked with governments, we've worked with others in the private sector, we've listened to civil society, and we're doing things at a country level that are really making an impact on the ground. Because I think if you don't do that, actually, we're not going to make the progress that we all desperately want to see and to make. And so, I'm very excited, and I'm very positive, and I'm very focused about that. And I think the other thing is as well on innovation. As I said, there are so many exciting things coming down our innovation pipeline when you put sustainability lens. Better products, better sensorials, really exciting consumers. I think those two things together make me feel pretty optimistic and excited.
Well, we'll look forward to hearing all about that. And it is very exciting. And thank you for the work that you do and that Unilever has been doing for so long, and for reminding us that this is, even in this moment that we're having, still a very exciting, innovative, exciting profession world that we all work in and live in and get to be a part of. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for being a part of Two Steps Forward. Please give it up for Rebecca Marmot.
One of my favourite points about that conversation we've just had with Rebecca is that Rebecca closed by reminding us how much of this is about relationships and friendships. And again, that's why we gather at things like climate weeks. That's why we don't see our family for a couple of days and spend a lot of time sitting on trains and drink lots of tea and coffee, is because the relationships that we'll make in this room, the incredible audience that we have right here, the relationships that we'll make this week may serve the foundation for then some massive collaborations and new exciting things, as has a long-term friendship between Joel and I resulted in an amazing podcast.
I could not be more excited about this, not just this event today, but this podcast that we've been doing, and the fact that I get to talk to you every week or two and have these great conversations with amazing people like Rebecca, and now we get to do that in front of this incredibly good-looking audience.
They are absolutely stunning. It's quite distracting.
Yeah, well, on that note, let's bring this to a close. First of all, thank you to Unilever for hosting Solutions House. Thank you, of course, to Rebecca for giving up an hour of your busy day to talk with us. And thank you all so much for being in the room here. Be sure to follow or subscribe to Two Steps Forward wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to Trellis Briefing, the daily newsletter from Trellis Group. Just go to trellis.net to sign up. And absolutely check out Soli's musings every week on Substack. One of my favorite things of the week, always a joy to read. And finally, follow Soli and me on Weekend. That's it for this episode from Solutions House live at London Climate Action Week. Thanks for being a part of this. We'll see you next time.